Hey everyone, welcome to the Darshan Talks podcast. I am your host, Darshan Kulkarni. In case you haven't heard, it's my mission to help patients trust the products they depend on. I'm an attorney, I'm a pharmacist, and I advise companies with FDA regulated products. So if you have an interest in an FDA regulated company or its products, this is the podcast for you. So today's podcast is really, really interesting. And the reason it's interesting is because if you are in trademark law, if you are interested in luxury brands, if you are going, you know what, I really like Chanel, or I really like, I don't know, Hermes, or whatever it is, this is the podcast for you. Because if you're trying to build a luxury brand, we have the IP attorney who focuses on that. So if you're in pharma, you're building a brand, you probably want to, if you're in marketing, if you're even in medical affairs, you may find this conversation to be interesting. So our guest today is really interesting because she is a partner at Duane Morris, which is a national law firm. She's the team lead for the fashion, luxury, and consumer branded products industry group. And her practice is focused on growing and protecting global brand portfolios. And she gravitates towards nuanced areas, including, and this I thought was really fun, was gaming, fashion, CBD, and cannabis. And we had a quick little debrief going, did you really mean cannabis or did you actually mean CBD? And she's like, no. I mean cannabis. I was like, okay, this is going to be a fun conversation. So our guest for today, Christiane Campbell. Christy, how are you?
I'm great. And I'm so glad that you mentioned some of my favorite brands at the beginning. The Chanel and the Hermes before you got into the pharma. Because I know.
So, are you a brand person?
I am absolutely a brand person. And I particularly gravitate to smaller growing brands because I like to help them work from the ground up and gain some recognition. But yes, absolutely a brand person, and very much on the protection side as well. When I try and explain what I do to people, I say, hey, if you're ever so fortunate enough again in the future to travel the world and you happen to have a famous quick service restaurant that you really like, and you're traveling to, say, Sri Lanka or Australia or anywhere in the Middle East and North Africa, and you want to get that particular meal from that particular quick service restaurant, you want to walk in and know that the lighting looks the same, the floors look the same, the menu boards look the same, the signage looks the same. And that's my job. It's my job to make sure that that stuff looks the same. Same thing. If you want to drink Coca-Cola in any country you order, you expect that red can with the white writing. And it's, brands are really significant to people. So, yes, it is. It's a fun practice, and I'm definitely a brand person.
So let's start from two different areas. So you first talked about quick service restaurants, which is not what I would generally think of as quote unquote high street or what I think of as a luxury brand. Having said that, they are part of our everyday life. And what I think you're sort of hinting at, and I really want to explore this a little bit, is trade dress. So I want to talk about trade dress. I want to hear a little bit more about it. But the other part, and I'm not letting you go so easily away from Hermes and from Louis Vuitton or from Chanel, because what is it that from your perspective, having dealt with so many different brands, why do people gravitate and pay so much more for a brand when you've got a knockoff that'll cost $100? And sometimes you don't even need a knockoff. Sometimes you just want a regular brand you got from Target, and it'll do the same exact thing if it's a purse or it's a jacket. So what is it that draws people in?
Well, I'd like to say it's the really good work that a trademark lawyer may do for the for the brand itself. But really, it comes down to a level of quality, a level of recognition, and sometimes price point. I mean, really, Louis Vuitton, a Louis Vuitton bag is a lot more expensive than, say, a Coach, which is no less high quality, but it's a little bit on the cheaper side. And then you go down and buy things at Target, okay. But there's really a cachet and a level of quality that comes with the brand. And there's trends. There's, everybody wants to have what right now it's influencers really are playing a big part in the market, but everybody wants, Champion saw kind of a resurgence because it became popular in Europe and then here. Adidas has done such a phenomenal job of staying ahead of trends, staying ahead of the curve, so that people want to wear sneakers with the 3 stripes. And there's an opposite of legitimacy to counterfeits. The quality is perceived as lower. Gray market's a more challenging area. But really, for those brand portfolios that have maintained luxury status and have kind of the brand cachet, the brand following, the brand equity, the brand strength, those are the ones when, we do a due diligence review of those brands. They don't have a lot of counterfeiting issues. They don't have as many infringement issues, and don't have as many dilution issues, meaning people speaking badly about the brand, using it in negative light, possibly adopting brands that look, sound, or smell somewhat similar but aren't exactly on target. And so really it's a lot to do with brand protection and global strategy, consistency.
So what you're saying, and please correct me if I'm wrong, what you're saying is the beauty is in the consistency. And you discussed that in regular consumer brands, but it's almost becoming more important in these luxury brands, that you can go anywhere in the world and you'll get the same exact Prada bag. And that's what makes, and they don't drop the cost just because it's in Afghanistan. I'm not sure if they sell Prada in Afghanistan, but wherever it is, or whether it's in India, or whether it's in the US, the price is going to be the same, and the cachet lies in the price, which I think is fascinating because I remember in 2008, one of the brands that really spoke to me, and I have no idea if this is one of your clients, so please feel free to go. I can't discuss this, but I remember Coach. Coach used to be the super luxury brand, and then I saw the price drop, and I saw Coach everywhere, and the cachet associated with it dropped. And now, from what I gather, they're rebuilding that. But I thought that was a fascinating case study in what happens when the branding changes and the result is different. So I'd love to get your comment on, was it around the price or was it something different there?
That is an excellent point. And it really leads into kind of another one, which is a lot of these high-end brands. Lilly Pulitzer is one example, and there are many others, but that do partnerships with lower price point retailers like Target. There's a real decision-making process that the brands have to go through. Do we offer our brand at a lower price point? Do we do a partnership or a collab? It's worked out really well for a lot of brands that have offered like a Target edition or a Kohl's edition of different brands. It tends to work better when they change the brand just slightly so that it's recognizable as not like the thing. But if it's the actual brand, like Coach doing with reducing price points, there's a number of reasons. You might think about, okay, well, clearly the market for stuff being sold at Target is huge, and so many people are buying things at lower price points. So let's drop our prices, sell more goods. But you're right. With that comes that perception of perhaps lower quality. And that's it's human condition. I think we're conditioned to think that more expensive things are just more luxurious and higher quality, cheaper, perhaps less so. Then you get that, that the cheaper version may be being sold at Target or being sold at Kohl's, but those cheaper versions get the benefit of using, the higher end name. When you see, whatever brand it is being sold at a Kohl's or a Target, it's, related to the big brand that you want. And that some of that quality and perception of higher quality bleeds down, even though it's a lower price point.
So is that why you see a lot of these brands do partnerships with a completely different industry? So you see a lot of, one of my favorites is Louis Vuitton, does a lot of branding with music artists. And that's because then you aren't sort of having an impact on the quality as much as you're connecting to a different audience. Is that basically the thought process then?
In some ways, it's almost like, endorsements. You see just the Masters being recent, you see Jordan Spieth wearing Under Armour, and there's, it's an implicit endorsement. There's obviously a legitimate and outward endorsement as well. But yeah, so brands like Supreme, brands like Louis, a number that do kind of expand. A lot of that's similar to how influencer marketing is happening. Recent studies show, and I don't have any to quote from, but they're out there, that consumers right now are more influenced by influencers in their purchasing decisions than they are by celebrities that they know have been paid millions and millions of dollars to stand up, in the middle of the first 30 seconds of the Super Bowl to say, use this because I do. There's just an authenticity that comes with influencer marketing. And it's very much the same thing. It's brands brands have got to resonate with not only their core consumers, but also the consumers they want. So if, there's a way to get to a broader audience by being involved with musical artists and therefore being involved in South by Southwest. And that means, or maybe it's Coachella and you get your name out there, then you're speaking to a younger audience of, wealthy potential Louis fans.
Yeah. Wow. That sort of blows my mind. So obvious and yet sort of never struck me. But that takes me to this next question, which is you mentioned this in passing, and I'm fascinated by it. You help companies do a due diligence review of their brands. What does that even involve? How do you even begin to go, I need this?
There's a lot of different stages at which that might come into play. One is, and this happens most frequently right now with cannabis companies. They will come to me for what I call a diagnostic. And they'll say, hey, we're a regional operator. Most of them coming from the West Coast, Colorado, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, California, obviously. We've got some brand equity in this regional brand. We want to grow. We want to know that our brand is scalable. We want to know that our brand is inherently strong, distinguishes us from others. We want to know that our brand is relatively strong. We're not going to run into infringement issues on either side. Because we're looking for funding or we're looking for an exit, strategic buyer or private equity involvement, whatever it is. They want to know, what here, and they'll tell me, here are the products we have. Some, they're all cannabis products. Some are CBD, which fall within the threshold to not be considered marijuana and therefore scheduled on the Controlled Substances Act. Some may actually be marijuana products that they can actually offer and sell in the region that they're in. Say it's, again, Oregon, Colorado, Washington, California. So, I look and do a due diligence review in terms of scalability. I look at the federal level. Is this brand protectable? Is it scalable? Can we get you federal protection somehow so that we can position the brand for growth and for exit? We're starting to look internationally as well because, some savvy cannabis brands are thinking about, well, what happens when, the states open up and we have the ability to go overseas. Due diligence review prior to a sale of a brand portfolio. It's so important to make sure that a company has the protections they say they have, that they don't have gaps in their protection, to make sure that they've got, again, room for growth. And that might mean industry-wise or geography-wise, whether you're talking about cannabis brands or even fashion brands. A lot of fashion brands will come to me and say, okay, well, we're offering apparel. Okay, we need to consider if that brand is also available for use and theoretically protectable and enforceable for jewelry as well. And then a lot of fashion brands like to move into lifestyle. So we might want to be looking at home furnishings, wall hangings, carpets, things like that. So that might be prior to sale or just while we're trying to get a company buttoned up for valuations and things like that. On the flip side, if a client that I represent is looking to acquire or fund or in some way get involved with a brand portfolio of another company, our due diligence review is going to look at what brands do they have. And, we look at the patent aspects, the trade secrets, copyrights as well, but I'm focused primarily on the branding side. Look at what they have, look at what liabilities there might be, what if there are liens, and then look at what might be out there. In the quick service restaurant industry, we've got to look at, where are countries of entry and what might be hitting us from the sides. Say we're going to go into a country that we've never operated. Trademarks are territorial. So if a client says to me, okay, we're going to go into Sri Lanka and open a whole bunch of restaurants, It may be that somebody from Sri Lanka visited the United States and saw our client's restaurant model, became a really big fan, and coming to America has the McDowell's example, which is absolutely phenomenal. I love using that. But opened up, a restaurant that looks just like our clients in Sri Lanka. So, you got to think about things like that. And that's a due diligence, looking at what infringement issues might be out there and what our options are in terms of enforcement. How can we stop this from happening? How can we fix it? And at what cost?
So it's funny to talk about the fictional example of McDowell's, which right now is super.
It's my absolute favorite. I love
it. It's a great, it's a phenomenal movie with hilarious parts of it. But the part I find interesting is the actual real life corollary to that, which is Burger King in Australia. And that's the one that I think Burger King couldn't actually use its own name in Australia because they didn't get there fast enough. Is this a client that we cannot get into?
Yes.
Okay, fair enough. We'll avoid that for now.
Should have told you first.
That's okay.
I can speak in general terms. It's exactly the point. That's exactly the point. Their trademarks are territorial. And you see it happen most often in China and I would say countries. Yeah. But and a lot of it has to do with common law versus civil law, first to use versus first to register, which are, very nuanced, could be an entire curriculum at a trademark class in law school. But the point is, because they're territorial, your rights in the United States, absent a couple, circumstances, don't extend outside. Canada, a little bit different. Mexico, a little different because you do have, they're border countries. But generally speaking, rights in the United States don't get you anything overseas. So it is, again, very possible that somebody coming here, visiting a quick service restaurant that they're a very big fan of, can go to another country, using an identical business model, identical trade dress, and that could be a problem for the country when it goes to expand.
So let's avoid the company we just mentioned. Let's talk about a different company. Right now, you're seeing China really open up its industry, and I'm saying that as if this is a new thing. I think China's been brilliant at this for the last several years. The part I find fascinating is they waited for Apple to come in and do its own branding, build its own companies there. I was wondering, from your experience, what stopped a company in China from going, you know what, I love this brand. We already know it's got steam behind it. Why don't I start my own company and call it Apple?
That is a great question. That's a great question, because I don't know that it didn't happen. I see every single day, when we come up with a brand portfolio strategy for a client, the big question is, okay, are we going to file overseas? And if so, where? And it usually, that question, the answer is, where do they have strategic interests? Where are they actually operating? Where are they marketing? And I always add China to the list. Always add, no matter what their goals are or plans are in China. And the reason is the way the IP laws work in China, without, sounding like I'm saying negative, like something negative about the Chinese IP laws, they do in a way favor opportunists that have seen a business model work in another country and come to China and adopt it. It is a very rare case when I take a client into China by way of the registry or by way of actually opening a brick and mortar store or starting to offer product in China, manufacture in China, whatever it is. It is a very rare case that we don't get to China and find out that we are behind somebody without any legitimate rights or interests, having filed an application for registration of a brand that's identical to our clients, opened a restaurant that's identical to our clients, or done something to get in first. And it's a real challenge. It's a real problem for a lot of clients in China. The first to register system creates some benefits for the US companies that might get there early and file an application for registration to kind of put their stake in the ground. There are situations where after 5 years, if they have a registration on the registry and it's not used, it's vulnerable to attack for non-use. So sometimes with clients, we will advise filing backup applications, starting the clock over and over until they have operations there and a defensible registration. But it is hard to stop. Again, I'll use the term opportunists, but companies in China that see a business model, want to adopt it. I'm not aware of, I don't have firsthand knowledge of anything that Apple may have encountered. I'm sure years and years ago, because of manufacturing, marketing, sales, reach, they probably buttoned their rights up in China very early on, probably fought those through to the extent they had to. But I know, one pretty well-known example is Michael Jordan. And there was because in China, you've got character marks, you've got literal translations, conceptual translations, all these different iterations that you could have of what we perceive as an American brand. And Michael Jordan had issues with his own brand being kind of tied up by a Chinese national there, and fought, I think it was maybe 9 or so years to try and clear that. So it's a real issue. And I wouldn't assume just because Apple has been successful, and some of our restaurant clients and some of our fashion clients have been successful in operating in China, that there have not been issues, because there are many.
So that's an interesting angle to take. So what you're saying is China tends to be forgiving of opportunistic models, which I think is fascinating by itself. But you take that, and I don't know the law around cannabis in China, but can I go right now and go, you know what, I'm growing. One of the biggest markets I can be in is China, but I don't know if their version of the laws allow for cannabis registration. And if it does, that's great. And then we can have a whole set of conversations there. But my first question is, do you happen to know if it does?
I don't, although I do know this. China, unlike the United States, and unlike, many other jurisdictions do the same thing, but China does not require a party filing an application for registration there to have a bona fide intent to use or any actual use of a mark there, which suggests to me they don't have a lawful use rule. Although I do think they've got identifications and a manual of acceptable identifications of goods and services. So I have to think that you probably cannot get anything cannabis related, at least as far as it's illegal there, protected.
Right. So to me, that's sort of an interesting industry in that it's one of the only industries that you aren't being left behind yet.
Right.
Because I would imagine that in other industries, the ship sailed as long as legal people have tried to go in there and put a flag and say this belongs to me now. But with cannabis, if it's potentially, as there are a lot of ifs that quite honestly neither one of us have looked into right now, and I should put that hold on, where did it go? Not necessarily legal advice.
Well, the one thing I will say, while I'm thinking of it, is, a lot of what we do when we file federal applications for cannabis type brands, not so much when we file state, but we will be, I don't want to say vague, but we're not going to claim necessarily cannabis or CBD or marijuana if we don't have to. So, in terms of strategy and what we're advising clients, it does make sense at this point. If just say you have a brand that you're using on and in connection with edibles, and just say you have a plan to work through an MSO, potentially have, nationwide use, scalability for growth overseas, there's the opportunity now to file in China for confectionery.
Right.
I don't say it has marijuana in it. I don't have to say any of that. And China doesn't check use. So, on the back end, could that ultimate registration be vulnerable to attack on the basis of an unlawful? I don't think so in China. But if you're claiming confectionery, that's not wrong, right? I mean, an edible, theoretically, confectionery.
I'm just thinking right now, the perfect person to do this is I found this to be hilarious and yet so poignant at the same time, that Snoop Dogg and Martha Stewart can do a brand together.
I love it. I love it. I mean, what better marriage of worlds? We talk about expanding your consumer base.
Right?
I love what she's done. I think she was in Bad Moms, which I watched only recently. But yes, she has got, what our cannabis companies that are kind of like looking at that new consumer, the casually curious, the people that want to buy like the Martha Stewart tabletop stuff are, at the PTA meetings willing to partake and have something that's probably more Martha than Snoop, but it does have a lot to do with brand cachet and what people are willing to, consume or not.
What I thought was fascinating was there was a roast, and I forget which one, but Snoop Dogg and Martha Stewart were on there. And I forget who it was, but someone went onto the DS and goes, there are a bunch of rappers on this thing, but the only person who served time is Martha Stewart. Which
She only want to get caught.
Exactly. Fair enough. But that was, I just thought that was fascinating. So we've got a situation now where we're talking about cannabis, we're talking about branding. What in your sort of perception, why is it that pharma has not gone out and said, you know what, we're learning things from the way the cannabis industry is working. Mm-hmm. Why hasn't pharma gone out and said, you know what, we're going to create a brand portfolio to create a luxury brand around us? Why is there no Apple ibuprofen?
Well, I think the example I gave you before is I had a root canal yesterday, so I'm somewhat able to talk. But I wanted to buy Advil. I did not want to buy the store brand, similarly colored, less shiny pill. Again, it comes down to I guess in that case, not so much price, but cachet. I know Advil. I trust Advil. I know what the ingredients are. I know what it does. It's a brand recognition. There's brand strength there. Pharma, there's a great SNL skit about pharma branding, and I share it with all of our pharma clients because I think it's absolutely hysterical. And if you see some of the pharmaceutical product ads, they have pretty packaging, pretty branding, and that's important because the reps go into doctors' offices and they have to have something that makes them look good and set them apart. And it's very much a sales cycle. But the branding, the words themselves are ridiculous. And the SNL skit talks about like how ridiculous they are. And, from a trademark perspective, I love it because some of them are like, they're beyond like on the trademark strength spectrum. They're so far off the reservation into like fanciful and they're completely unnecessary. It's like you took the first initial of everybody sitting in the room and you combined it somehow. It's like Hollywood marriages or something. But the brands are great, and I think pharma has recognized people don't care what that brand sounds like or looks like because the doctors do, but a lot of that's the rep, not so much the brand. The doctor's going to prescribe something to a patient, and the patient's probably not saying, like, I have screws in my foot and we happen to represent a company that makes, medical implant screws. And I wanted them. My doctor thought I was nuts because I asked for screws by brand, but that's a very unusual occurrence. Usually people are saying, this is my ailment. This is what I want to be treated with. Insurance, they're not paying it out of pocket. That being said, because most states that are coming online with cannabis in any capacity are starting medical and they're migrating into recreational.
Yeah.
You're going to see some companies that are going to have pharmaceutical cannabis products and recreational cannabis products. And the main distinction between the two is not so much the ingredients. It's going to be the branding. There's a different sound, look, feel for the medical type stuff. And then there's a different type, look and feel for and that's, again, goes to trade dress, for the recreational stuff. Tito's branding is significantly different from how Advil brands their stuff. That's going to become really significant in dispensaries. I'm in Pennsylvania, so here we have medical marijuana, not recreational. So I'm kind of uniquely positioned to see what's going on in the states around us where we're purely a medical state, and a very conservative one as far as where we buy our alcohol and our beer in Pennsylvania too. This. You're having a party, you got to go 5 different places. But you're going to have consumers walking into a dispensary with, they're looking for, and there's one local dispensary, Terra Vita, that does a phenomenal job of this. but they're looking at end of life care or oncological or pain management. Athletes for Care is another organization, I think it was founded by 2 Philadelphia athletes, but they're looking for pharmaceutical benefits, and the branding that surrounds that is going to be significant, because I guess there are some people who use Tito's for pain, but the point is they're looking for something that has legitimacy and authenticity as to pain management when they're looking at a cannabis pharma product. On the recreational side, people are looking for something that looks recreational. A lot of challenges come with that. That could be an entirely different podcast, but every state that allows recreational cannabis has guidelines for how they can be branded and packaged. And there's a great example out of, I think it was Maine, where a company was offering their cannabis product using a mermaid. And the state's position was, no, that looks like a cartoon. Children might like that. Can't have that branding. So that's a real, I'm getting way off the reservation in terms of answering the question about, pharmaceutical luxury brands. But I think what I'm getting at is one place where you might see some tiering of luxury, mid-road, and more like almost functional pharma brands is going to be in the cannabis space.
So it's funny you say that, because there's so many different points that come out of that. Almost an entirely new podcast, which we definitely have to do again for sure.
Yeah.
But the part that really stuck out at me was this idea of the naming of pharmaceutical products. And you pointed out that they're so far off the reservation because it's unusual. Yeah, I do FDA regulatory law. And the part that's interesting to me is the fact that the FDA actually has a whole guidance on how you name products, which is interesting by itself, but it favors the idea that you can't mispronounce names. And one of the good examples that I've actually dealt with is hydralazine and hydroxyzine. They do completely different things, but the generics sound so similar, and you don't want people misprescribing them. The part that I think is interesting, that along with that, is the other comment you made, which was this idea of who's actually saying the word in the end. Yeah. And in the case of pharma, it lands up being pharma saying, the physician prescribing to the pharmacist, and they got to figure that piece out, which is easier to do than the patient who has to pronounce in the case of cannabis. So I wonder if, based on what you're saying, a huge component of who is who the audience is and who actually has to pronounce it plays a role in the trademarking, the trade dress associated with it, and the branding associated with it. So do you see a future in which cannabis products that are trying to go after those medicinal uses start using a more pharmaceutical type naming scheme, if you will, to make themselves look more medical?
Yes. And I mean, this is all, this is what I see. This is opinion. I do think so. And, there's so much, cannabis, love the banner. Cannabis is a space that it's not new, but the opening up, the marketability, there's a very new type of consumer. And cannabis branding has really had to grow up. I don't mean that in a bad way, but, in the past where, you just have people going into a Colorado dispensary looking for a particular strain or looking for a particular edible, it was okay to have these like cheeky names, and cheeky names are fine. They're fine. But a lot of them traded on legitimate brand names. I can name 2 great examples, Gorilla Glue and Girl Scout Cookie. And that was all okay. I mean, not legally okay, but okay in terms of like consumers. But now, and just a quick plug, MJ Brand Insights is like a daily read for me. They do such a phenomenal job of breaking down what's going on with cannabis and marijuana branding. And they do, the last few months, they've done a list of the hottest brands in, recreational legal states. So Oregon, I think they did Washington, pretty sure they did California, and now Colorado. And when you look at the brands that are the hottest, they have a very clean, they're not using the canna prefix or suffix. limited exceptions. They're not using, big psychedelic marijuana leaves. Nothing against any of that, but they are a lot more refined. And that adds to their branding and their packaging and everything surrounding their branding a level of legitimacy that, a lot of these are recreational brands. But the point is, yes, I do see that, the companies that are getting into the cannabis space, and if they're doing it for the pharmaceutical reasons, that's a challenge anyway, because of the FDA looking at CBD as a drug, in any event, those brands are getting a little bit more buttoned up and saying, okay, we probably can't, I don't even want to throw out an example because there are a lot, but we probably don't want to use a big cartoon marijuana leaf with, rainbows behind it and the word green, the word, the suffix or prefix canna. Leaf is pretty popular, but probably don't want to use that if we're trying to market a product that, and a lot of times it's an older consumer, and we're not necessarily talking about the Woodstock, like probably attended Woodstock, but that age, looking for, again, pain management, oncological pain management, or just relief, end of life care. They're not necessarily looking for a party. So the branding's going to have to. The branding is going to drive the consumers, but the consumers are driving the branding, and the brands that are doing the pharmaceutical space, recognize this and recognize that they've got to be out there with something that sounds legitimate, resonates with their consumers and their target consumers, just like any brand does.
So it's funny you talk about cheeky names. I'm going to introduce this concept knowing fully well you're going to respond, but we're going to really get into it on our next podcast. But you talk about the concept of cheeky names. And the reason that jumps out at me is because nicotine and nicotine replacement products really did that whole cheeky name thing. Mm-hmm. And the FDA went after them for exactly that process. So right now, do you see branding in cannabis to be in its infancy, having not been reframed, if you will, by FDA regulatory considerations? And how do you see that changing in the future?
That's an excellent question. So with anything pharmaceutical or medical devices, you have the FDA. With alcohol brands, you've got cola. So, labeling, you've got to deal with other regulations. Cannabis, to some extent, you've got, the FDCA, which is restricting CBD federally because it's being considered as an actual drug. But I do think that there will come a time that, federal legality is certainly on the horizon. I don't know how far away, but if you watch, and if you had an animated graphic to look at the states that are coming online, it's kind of it's the perimeter of the U.S. And then I think one cannabis expert actually called it the New Jersey effect, and what Jersey's effect was going to be on New York and Pennsylvania, and that Jersey effect is really going to be an East Coast, West Coast, and then there's going to be so probably some states in the middle are going to be the last ones to go. But point being, I think we're only moving forward. I don't see past or current administration and whatever happens politically, I don't see that changing the course, maybe slowing it, maybe accelerating it, but we're moving forward. If we stall, if we move slowly, if we move quickly, we're still moving forward. I don't think we're going to be taking too many steps back. Maybe with some of the nuances and the little details in terms of there's things like prison reform and decriminalization in certain states, but generally speaking, we're moving toward federal legalization, and that is going to, I think, inform a need for regulatory and governing authority to look at different products being used for different things and clearance, and whether it comes within the purview of the FDA, I don't know, but there's just a lot of regulations. It still has to be regulated. That's an opinion. I don't think it's an unpopular one. It has to be regulated. And it can't just go from, what it is right now to absolutely no regulations, open season. So I do see there being a need for a regulatory framework.
I would agree with you. And I think I'd actually compare where we are right now to be where we are with privacy, in that it's state by state. Everyone's doing their own thing there. And that's great when you're trying to discover something. But if you're trying to legitimize an industry, that includes privacy, you kind of have to do it at a federal level just so that we have equal rules across the different states. The other thing I would add is I would agree with you that I think we're headed towards the idea of legalization at the federal level. I've actually been in on meetings where even Janet Woodcock from the FDA has been like, we know which direction this is going, but we do believe that we regulate them. There's no reason why we wouldn't. The part that I thought was interesting that no one talked about, but I'm seeing a rise of, is the interest in psilocybin that's starting to kick in as well. So I feel like cannabis is the canary in the coal mine. And I think there are going to be more products that have been generally seen as illegal that are going to start coming in via the different states. So definitely worth exploring. Christiane, let me ask you this question. If you had to ask the audience a question, what would you like to ask them?
I would like to hear from people as to what their favorite brands are.
Ooh.
Or what do they think are the strongest brands? And that can be in the industry.
Let's help them out. What might be some that you'd include in there?
Well, I mean, I think Rolex was actually just released in a report as the strongest.
Okay.
Montclair was up there. So I'm talking like fashion luxury.
Sure.
The obvious are always McDonald's, Burger King, Starbucks, Google. And maybe, I guess.
Audrey's coming in saying Tesla.
That, you know what? That is a great one. Not many competitors have really gotten a corner on the market, and I'm seeing them everywhere. And there's so few. I mean, they've done a great job with PR, right? Like, they're not doing anything wrong. And I think there were some news reports of like a self-driving vehicle that maybe reflected badly on Google or something. But Tesla, I don't hear about many products liability issues. I'm sure they're out there. But they've done a great job managing that brand. So that's a good one. That's a really good one, and growing.
Very cool. So let's ask a couple of quick rapid fire questions. You ready?
Sure. Like I said, I did not prepare for this. You didn't send me. I have no idea.
How do you define success?
If I won the lottery tomorrow, would I live somewhere different? Would I drive something different? Would I work a different job? And the answer to all those is no. So to me, that is the definition of success. So I feel like I'm successful because I'm where I want to be, regardless of circumstances.
Oh, I love it. Okay. What challenges you then?
My kids. The fact that there's only 24 hours in a day and I have to sleep for some of them.
And what makes you happy?
My kids. Helping other people. I get a lot of enjoyment out of, that's why I like my job. I'm constantly helping people and consulting and advising and helping them, make their businesses better and getting them out of trouble. I love hanging up the phone with a client when they say, thank you, I'm going to sleep better tonight. That makes me happy.
Last question. Who do you trust completely?
My dog and my horse. The only two that don't talk back to me, my dog and my horse. Now if I can make a generalization right now, the staff, and I hate to call them staff, but the team I have working with me at the firm, I trust completely. And that's a great place to be in my career.
Very, very cool. I'm going to do a quick summary of what we discussed. We talked about the reason for a brand, and we talked about quality, recognition, price, cachet, trends, influencers, and we really need to get into influencers. That's a whole thing we want to talk about. We talked about famous brands, whether we're talking about Adidas, we're talking about trends associated with it. We got into gray markets and counterfeits a little bit. We spoke about due diligence, and then we got into a whole due diligence discussion. We talked about negative light as a concept, but we didn't really discuss it. You talked about the process of due diligence, everything from when do you do it prior to sale, buttoning up, prepping for sale, to buying of a company, and what might you be looking at in those scenarios. We talked about naming of products and how that differs for a drug versus cannabis. We also talked very briefly about trade dress and the use of cheeky names, for lack of a better term. And I think that was the primary focus. Did I miss anything?
That was a really good, that was like 7 years worth of curriculum in a law school for trademark. Covered everything.
We did. We're done.
One thing we didn't get into that I'd like to just touch on briefly is the selection of names. And you mentioned due diligence. And one thing that we almost always do with a client that is adopting, or sometimes they've already married, a particular brand that they want to use for particular products. I think I briefly mentioned we do clearance and availability searching. And traditionally, clearance and availability searching was about what's on the registry, what's out there in common law, whose rights might you be infringing, how much scalability, marketability. But one thing that has become so important is the PR. You have to, and I guess it traditionally wasn't the role of the trademark lawyer, and maybe I've taken on too much, but it's what I do and my team does. We factor in that PR aspect. And a great example is, recently Gap ran an ad. I think it was actually during the election, which seems like forever ago, but they showed like a blue sweatshirt and a red sweatshirt, and they got a lot of flack for that. And there was some tweets recently by one brand that, reflected negatively, could have been perceived as anti-Me Too movement. But things like Black Lives Matter, Me Too, there's gun violence issues. There's just so many different political and social issues that brands want to be woke. They want to demonstrate that, kind of like Louis Vuitton getting involved in the music industry, and kind of expanding where they're visible. They want to be woke, and they want their tweets to show that, and they want their influencers to reflect that, and they want their brands and their brand perception to reflect that. But they got to be so careful. And there are a number of brands that have come out and said, we do not care. Patagonia, I can't talk in too much detail, but has done a great job of like standing up for what they believe in and saying, we don't care if we lose consumers over this. This is what we believe in, and this is what we're doing. But there are some brands, slogans, ad campaigns, that could be offensive. And that's something that we as trademark lawyers are now looking at. When a client calls me, it's typically 6 p.m. on a Friday saying we're ready to launch this ad now, or 5 minutes ago, or we already did. What's our exposure? It's my favorite phone calls. They really want to know quickly, what, peek around the corners. And those should not be decisions made by one person. You've got to be bouncing ideas, because there are things I've looked at, like, again, the Gap tweet or ad, whatever it was. And there are a couple other examples that I looked at and I thought, gosh, if I had been the attorney reviewing that, I think I would have picked up on the issue, but maybe not. Maybe I would have been so focused on potential infringements or color schemes or scalability, marketability. So it's really important to have a holistic, wraparound approach to clearing a brand for use and launch, and clearing an ad campaign for use and launch, because there's just so much hot water that a brand can get itself into in 2021, 2020, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon.
We're definitely going to have a discussion around woke and because that's a whole beast by itself. I do want to clarify, nothing that we said should be considered to be legal advice of any kind or clinical. It's intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. For those of you who missed it, where can they reach you, Christy?
My email. Do you want me to put it in? I can put it in the chat.
Feel free to put it in the chat, but if you just want to say it.
Yeah. It's C Campbell, C Campbell, which is C and then Campbell like the soup, at DwayneMorris.com. And I did, I'm trying to type at the same time. Clearly not doing well with multitasking. I did send around LinkedIn, and I think you had it on LinkedIn as well. So anybody joining us through LinkedIn, my email should be there and available on LinkedIn. If not, please feel free to connect with me.
It's ccampbell@DwayneMorris.com, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
that should be for everyone right now. Yep. So that should be.
Oh, mine was in the private chat.
Yeah, you put it into the private chat. It's fine. It's close.
Sorry.
That's okay.
See, I got through the whole thing, and then
it's all good. If you like this podcast, please leave a comment. Please like. Please subscribe. You can find me on Darshan Talks on Twitter, or go to our website at darshantalks.com. Chrissy, this was really, really fun having you on. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much.